So I think what we took out of the session is that there are many difficult conversations that need to be had about the types of advocacy that we do and the privileges that are shared in that advocacy. But the difficulty with having those conversations and coming out with a strategy immediately afterwards is that we haven't had the time to thrash out the issues. A way forward, however, is to think through how it is that we can work better in networks, how it is that we can support each other through shared resources, and what it is that we can do as a collective voice in as much as we're not always collective in the objectives that we're trying to achieve.
Okay, what I'm taking away from the session that we just had is that we need to go out there and be the voices. Whether you're using dance, movement, theater, visual art, whatever that you're using, let's go out there and actually do something and write our own stories and tell our own narratives.
I just attended a group discussion on movement and capacity building, and I'd say that the main point for me that I'm taking from this session is that firstly, grassroots organizations are struggling in various different ways with the concept of funding, access to funding. In terms of capacity building, I think the consensus was that the capacity is there and that it just needs to be built on it. It needs to be improved, it needs to be accelerated, and in order to do so, collaboration is key. That's what I got from the session.
I think what came out for me from the media session that we did was that we need to use the media as our allies, but also not forgetting to create our own messaging and our own media as the LGBTI community. This will in turn make sure that the message that is out there about us is what we want to put out there and what we feel comfortable about.
I think what came out clear is that research is happening, but that it is not well coordinated and therefore not very helpful. So what we need, I think, is to work on that particular disadvantage of uncoordinated research.
Picking up on this idea of uncoordinated, I think we see research happening in silos. So how do we create activist scholars that are embedded in their communities and can speak and translate this research into change and activism on the ground? And if we can't do that, then what is this research for?
As a team from Zambia, we have decided to say we can ride on the same tolerance that is there in order for us to get the achievement that we want, as in line with the kopano, kopano thing of 2017, talking about accelerating change. So looking now on a bigger picture, we are thinking of trying to see new strategies that would be able to guide us or maybe squash out the perception that is out there to the general population that usually gives a negative or the bad picture of the community.
In the Zimbabwe discussion group, things were raised. Most importantly, the increase in the number of organizations representing LGBTI persons in Zimbabwe, the opportunities that have arisen with the current political dispensation in Zimbabwe have provided LGBTI persons with an opportunity to have their voices heard by the new government, and also possibly to create new allies with the current government.
The main key point that I take from this session that we were discussing around the public perception in our two countries, Mozambique and Angola, is that it's similar. We have similar issues, but we also should be very bold in the way how to address and how we put our stories out there. So what I take from here is that we have to be positive. We have to change our narratives, and it's in our hands to do that.
We're having a group discussion as Botswana members who came for Kopano, and then we were talking about the LGBTI community and how the public seeing it and the activism. So one thing that I know and what I picked up from our discussion is that people, they are having those faces, they are showing the acceptance, not really meaning from the bottom of their hearts, but actually they're doing it for the sake of some reasons like maybe they want money, maybe they want to not be too much harsh on us, but not saying from the bottom of their hearts. And then we have those who are positive about us, those who can be activists, or those who can help us to be protected from being violated by the community.
From the discussion that we had at our table for Namibia, I think quite a lot of things came out. I think one of the main things that came out was that there is a lot of confusion within the movement itself. Trying to be one big movement with all the diversity within it, it creates a lot of confusion for the people within the movement, and probably more confusion for the people outside of the movement. That was one of the main things I think that came out that would probably hinder change to take place quickly, because we are forever trying to understand each other, and that makes things difficult. Whether there was a solution for that right now, I'm not sure. Other things that came up was some contradictions that we might not realize that we sort of practice every day through our thoughts, through our actions, through our feelings.
Strengthening the networks that we have and the linkages, and coming up with structures that will benefit both parties, and knowing our story and owning up to it.
And without the coordination of efforts, nothing can be achieved. And then as well, we have to, our message should be clear in terms of the targets which we want to reach, as well as the milestones in general.
We were not only discussing the issues and the challenges that LGBTI face in South Africa, meaning in all provinces, 9 provinces, but then we were discussing solutions on having that movement of change. And I believe as LGBTI, if we could only just focus on that we are all homosexual and human being, and not just LGBTI, because when we say LGBTI, we start dividing each other also.
The three countries, Seychelles, Madagascar and Mauritius, discussed the impact and influence of politics, laws and religion on the life of LGBTQI of their respective countries. Religion was predominantly the focus of the exchange. The first 2 countries were predominantly Christian, while Mauritius is a multi-ethnic island. So it was interesting to see what we could derive from each other's realities and how to go about for accelerating change for the betterment of the LGBTQI community.
The thing I've taken out of the discussions is that as an activist, there is an opportunity to change things around LGBTIs in Malawi. We can create a better environment for them to live, to access services without various confrontations from the society.
The initial thing is that there's a lot of work that needs to happen, and a lot of support and capacity building that needs to happen within supporting SMMEs in the LGBTI space, because there are a lot of challenges in terms of starting up your own business, in terms of getting clients, in terms of getting funding. So there needs to be some support targeted towards that particularly. The second thing is, and it's something that stood out for me because I had no idea about it, but trans inclusion in workplaces is a serious, serious problem. And there needs to be a lot of work that is directed particularly at inclusion of trans people. Because unfortunately, unlike, I think the rest of the LGBTI community, where your presentation isn't necessarily mutually inclusive or the same thing as what you identify as. So I think that there particularly needs to be a lot of work done around trans inclusion in workplaces and conscientization and education of people in HR positions, people in people that are involved in hiring people, essentially.
All right, so in our group session, we spoke about parents and parenting, and 3 main aspects came from it. Firstly, the experiences of LGBTQIA parents who have to come out to their children and what those experiences look like. Secondly, is thinking about the structure of the family, how that is upheld, and alternative families as well. And thirdly, how parents can be held accountable for how young teenage LGBTI persons experience their livelihoods.
What the key issues that came out for me were issues around messaging and how we need to craft our messages to target particularly perpetrators of violence against LGBTI persons. And what I also understood was that we need to be cognizant of the progress that we've made, bearing in mind that a few years back we didn't have that many messages, and now we do have messaging, and to really strategize around how we get that messaging to be effective.
And what stood out for me was that as much as we are being othered as the LGBTI communities, we also have to bear in mind what the other is thinking of us, what their own perception is of us. And whenever we're in negotiation of our existence being recognized, we also need to be very aware of that, of other people's feelings. And I think it's just generally a good place to start if we are talking about cohesion and nation building.
We are the people who, as the LGBTI community, need to be in the forefront of liberating ourselves from religious oppressions. And there are ways to do that. There are support systems. Use those allies as support systems to gather yourselves together. As we are doing in Botswana, we're gathering ourselves together. We're trying to contextualize the Bible and trying to bring our lived experiences as human beings and what the Bible is saying to a common understanding, and to also understand ourselves, because it's really important for us as LGBTI community to reconciliate our faith and our spirituality, because at the end of the day we are spiritual beings and we are human beings.
So what emerges for me is that if sports is all about wellness, wellness should start with accepting who LGBTI people are. That is to say, they should be allowed to play in any sporting courts with any other person. If it's a trans person, they should be allowed to play in their category. Say a trans man should be allowed to play in a soccer team for men, not in a soccer team for women, because they identify as a man. So what emerges else is that sports have been a great platform for sensitization or awareness raising, as some people have been able to learn through sporting activities in engaging with other LGBTIQ people. I feel there is a need to also invite coaches of different sporting codes, their captains and other members, to raise awareness and sensitize them so that they take the information back to their communities, or rather to their teams, so that LGBTI people are accepted and tolerated in the spaces so as to play the sports and advance them the process of Ubuntu, the spirit of Ubuntu and unity within sports.
See, a legislative working group was a very dynamic one. We did a reflection on what does policy and legislative reform means for us, and we've realized that our advocacy approach on that has mainly been about decriminalization, which means we need to do a rain check. And that basically means there's a need for us to contextualize what that means, and also that advocacy needs to be done not just at the structural level, but also ensure that behavioral interventions are done so that we're able to mainstream and ensure that intersectionalities are built within greater communities, but also ensure that our community issues are understood and furthered for our own betterment. But overall, the agenda thereof is to ensure that there is a strategy that frames a long-term fast-forward move for us as a movement.
I come from Madagascar. I'm the only one who represent my country. It's my first kopano, and it's the first important meeting with LGBT person that I attend. It is an important experience for me because it's allowed me to discover who we are exactly. As a heterosexual person, this meeting gave me more motivation to participate and to invest more in this change process. So certainly we are at the beginning of our activities in the country, but together I think that we will able to attain our objective.
Lovely.
For me, is the idea that getting out of the box on the media issue is to engage the traditional media, which has been more successful in Namibia, especially with the media such as the radios and also the new social medias like SMSs, which are much more viable and available to all Namibians.
What we saw there is in tradition, we should respect what's already there. We should learn the structures already in place of tradition so that it's easy for us to penetrate. When we went to social and political, we said, okay, fine, let's start capacitating the members of parliament, the members of the Senate, the traditional leaders back home, the councillors, and then after that, let's go to big gatherings whereby around 1,000 people are there because of the masses who go through. There's people who will be behind us and make those people champions. Then try to talk of something like inheritance rights and the relationship of sexual reproductive health rights and how LGBTIQ rights are related to this.
LGBTI is because of the volatile nature of LGBTI, of the Malawian society towards LGBTI and the hostility conditions that are in Malawi. The LGBTI community could not come out, such that, however, as a network, as a movement, we had to rely on allies. So we had to use our LGBTI ally organizations to speak upon our behalf. So, but how for the past 10 years or the past decade, Malawi has actually seen LGBTI allies advocating for the rights and safe spaces for LGBTI people in Malawi. But after a decade now, this is where we have now seeing that LGBTI are now visibly coming out to speak about themselves. They are now openly coming out because our allies, because of network.
What a fruitful session we've just had now. Some innovative, some creative thinking. But the one phrase that comes to mind, the more things seem to change, the more they stay the same. Essentially, I'm saying we've got really brilliant ideas that we've been using for a while. Let's not change them, but let's innovatively develop them. Let's use theatre to host discussion. Let's use creative writing to write and describe our own personal narratives. Host discussions that are going to help us to improve what we have. So yeah, that's what we discussed in creating innovative and new ways to push this movement.